Good morning, everyone. My name is Noreen Deedy. I'm the first year experience coordinator here in University College Cork, and I'm Vice President of Student Affairs Ireland. Acade Mila Fáilte, 100,000 welcomes. I would like to extend a special welcome to all of you who have travelled from overseas. There are 20 countries represented here this morning. Many of you know one another because this is the 6th Global Summit, and I certainly have seen familiar help you to make a speedy exit too. There are 3 assembly points, one on outside, one on the left, one on the right, and one behind, which is by the bicycle stands. We also want you to feel safe. All COVID restrictions in this country have been lifted. However, COVID is on the increase in this country again. You have masks in your welcome packs, and you also have antigen tests in your packs as well, in case you need to use them. If you're feeling unwell, then please inform one of our student ambassadors and they will take care of you. If you need tests completed before you return home, you'll see Joan down in the atrium and she will help you with that. The tests can be done across the street from here. You will see the schedules for the next 2 days on the digital screens throughout the hub. So we haven't really printed anything for you. So you'll see those schedules throughout the day. If you're unsure where you're meant to be, the student ambassadors will guide you. So please ask them. Don't be reluctant to approach them. They're here to help you. They're very well trained and they will accommodate you. Before I finish, I would like to say a special thanks to Martha Henshin, to Adele Coleman, to Maggie and Maeve, to Nikita, and to our student ambassadors. They've rallied around to make this global summit happen. So I would like to say a special thanks to all of them. And as you know, this is a hybrid event. We will have 62 people joining us online throughout today and tomorrow. So this wouldn't happen without the expertise of Ronan O'Neill, who's standing there at the back. Ronan is our technical support for the next 2 days, and Ronan is a postgraduate student in the Atlantic Technological University on the Mayo campus. So thank you, Ronan, for this, for making this happen. And I suppose during the day, because we have 62 people online, it's really important to keep to time. So you'll hear an announcement throughout the day asking you to move to certain rooms. And please just observe those announcements because we're all on different time zones. So we don't want people waiting a long time online for you to get to your breakout room, for example. In fact, they are online at the moment, Ronan told me, waiting to get into some of those breakout rooms. So we just need to stick to the schedule. You will be here for another hour, maybe. Don't worry about the ventilation. The windows automatically open, so the air will start filtering through. So you won't get too hot. Okay. So if there's anything you need, just approach me or approach our student ambassadors. I hope that you'll enjoy your time in Cork and in UCC, and that the next 48 hours will be a great experience for you, a great learning experience, but also an adventure too. So thank you very much. And I'll hand you over to Paul.
Good morning, everybody, and you're most welcome. I wasn't sure whether I would need my glasses, but then I was very sure this morning when I realized I left them at home. So I ran off and got a €2 pair in the shop. So I hope this works out. My name is Paul Moriarty. If I haven't met you already, I'm the director of the student experience here in University College Cork, based on the ground floor of this building. And I am also president of Student Affairs Ireland and Vice President of the European Council of Student Affairs. I would like to start by thanking the International Association of Student Affairs and Services for giving Student Affairs Ireland the opportunity to showcase what we do as professionals in Ireland and in University College Cork in particular, in tackling the world's most pressing problems. I would also like to thank our sponsors, EXTA, the European Council for Student Affairs. Unfortunately, Jean-Paul Rumeke, the president, is unable to join us in person last minute, but hopes to be joining us online over these 2 days. I am, however, delighted to see some familiar faces from previous summits, particularly Lisa, Birgit, I noticed, and of course our amazing host for Toronto, David, and that was a tremendous challenge and experience for us all. So it's brilliant to welcome you here to Cork. I am particularly delighted to welcome you here to UCC. We are a comprehensive university. The next speaker could talk an awful lot more about that, having been president of UCC, or the second next speaker. But as our president, unfortunately, at the moment, Professor John O'Halloran was unable to be here. He did address us, I thought, wonderfully last evening. And even I learned something new about UCC. He still comes up with all of these wonderful facts from time to time. And I think what came across in his address was his passion for sustainability, for the green agenda, for climate change, and generally for our role in supporting our role in helping to develop leaders and society going forward, and the huge role that student affairs and student services professionals play in that. So UCC, just a little bit about it. Depending on who you hear say it, we're either got 24,000 or 25,000 students, and that can change hourly, not just daily, but it's somewhere in there anyway. We're a comprehensive university, and we have 4 colleges: business and law, CACS as we call it, College of Arts, Celtic Studies and Social Studies, and we have CEFS, which is science, engineering, food science, and of course we have medicine and health as well, which includes the clinical therapies. The SDGs are a major influencer on the strategies, policies, and actions of student affairs professionals in Ireland. However, a whole of student affairs and services approach is essential. We've got massive challenges, and we must collaborate and use this time that we're together to continue to deepen our engagement and understanding of the SDGs and how we can enable and promote them. Over the next 2 days, we must look for solutions. We must map good practice, identify priorities, opportunities, and gaps by listening to one another, because each person's voice is important, so please use yours over this summit. The theme of this year's summit is cultivating graduate attributes to empower and sustain educational development. Cultivating graduate attributes is important in achieving the agenda of 2030. Graduates must develop capabilities to shape, lead, and succeed in the careers, communities, and industries of sustainable societies. Arguably, universities can educate graduates to implement every single one of the SDGs through learning and teaching, research, governance, and leadership. Addressing the challenges is everybody's business, and there is an urgent need for all of us to accelerate action. We must mobilize the means required to implement the SDGs as student affairs and student services professionals. After we leave here on Friday, we must continue to monitor, evaluate, and communicate our actions on the SDGs. We must continue to build momentum until we meet again at the next Global Summit in 2024. We're all dying to know where that might be, but I don't think we know yet. It is important to engage in reflections also. You are in an ideal setting. UCC is one of the most sustainable universities in the world, and only last night, I believe we came first in the most sustainable business in Ireland. So I just heard that this morning. And I know that you will enjoy the gardens and walks by the river, but you will also be interested you may be interested, I'm not sure if there's much time for any of this in our tight schedule, but you may be interested in visiting the Glucksman Gallery in the lower grounds, because there is an exhibition on biodiversity in contemporary Irish art showing in the gallery at the moment. The selected works detail various species of animals that make their home here on the UCC campus, And the exhibition also features paintings of Irish native trees, as well as research into the ways in which communities are conserving seeds to protect food crop for future generations. Before I introduce our next speaker, I would like to make a small announcement on behalf of Dr. Catherine O'Mahony, Director for the Integration of Research, Teaching and Learning in UCC. UCC will offer for the first time a postgraduate certificate in professional practice and leadership in higher education in this coming September. The postgraduate cert will be offered as a flexible learning opportunity that will connect participants to an experienced program team of academics and professional services staff in higher education. The program will enable engagement in peer learning, gain a professional qualification, and grow networks both nationally and internationally. Participants will discover the latest insights in the development of policy and practice and connect with peers across the higher education sector via a virtual and in-person learning environment. So Dr. O'Mahony will be in the atrium, that's where you were having coffee just before you came up, during the coffee break if any of you would like to discuss this further with her. So one final fact, I suppose, about UCC is that it was built in 1845, which was in the, I suppose, the midst of the Great Famine here in Ireland. So even then, education was seen as a way through poverty and finding ways of including people and having to go forward. So I'm delighted that you're here today, and I really hope that you will both enjoy the experience and that it'll be a productive one for us as organizations. And I particularly want to welcome anybody who will be online at this time, and we'll do our best to be inclusive in that regard as well. So now I would like to welcome the President of the International Association of Student Affairs and Services, Achim Meyer of der Heide, to address you. Thank you, Achim.
So, good morning, everybody. Thank you very much, Paul, for introducing me. As you told, I'm the current president of International IASIS, International Association for Student Affairs and Services, and in former times I have been Secretary General of the German National Association and Vice and President of the European Council for Student Affairs as well. It's a pleasure for me to welcome you at the 6th Global Summit, after we had one in Washington, D.C., Rome, Stellenbosch, Santiago de Chile, Toronto, and now Cork, Ireland. We have been nearly in all regions around the world, except Asia Pacific or continents. Maybe this will be the destination for the next Global Summit. We don't know, but I can't preview. My thanks at first to UCC, to Paul Moriarty and Student Affairs Ireland, and the university staff, the colleagues of IASIS, for preparing this Global Summit, and Extra as well, which is sponsoring the Global Summit this year as well. The 6th Global Summit, that's really a great development. 15 years ago, I joined as an international expert, a seminar for vice presidents for student affairs held by NASPA. My former colleague and executive director of NASPA, Gwen Dungy, and the old president from EPSA, Luke Wong, resumed back then that 3 stages exist in higher education: research, teaching, student affairs in this ranking. Problem has been student affairs, the 2nd class. Today, we can add from the university perspective one more stage: submission or transfer into the economy or into the society. Would this development push students' affairs further back? I don't think. Fortunately, it won't. On the contrary, today we feel especially honored that the president of European University Association, Professor Michael B. Murphy, is welcoming as well our Global Summit today. I would presume this underlines the increasing meaning of student affairs, recognized as well by the higher education institutions. For this successful development in the last years, we had hard to work. An important step on this way was to found IASIS. So I express today my thanks to our past president, Roger Ludeman, who had the idea and looked for allies. And so one basis was led by the continuous growth of the number of members. Today we count around about 1900 members. It's a great success. Other steps were to implement the global summits. And on the other hand, political lobbying was really helpful. For example, our common publication, Student Affairs and Services in Higher Education, Global Foundations, Issues and Best Practices, which make student affairs worldwide visible. Thanks to all of you who contributed with their national perspectives to realizing this book. Furthermore, there have been common declarations of all student services associations around the world, which led, for example, in 2009 to the UNESCO member states' obligation in the World Conference on Higher Education to provide adequate student services. The last issue has been enabled by common intervention of another past president, Rob Scher, who can't unfortunately join the Global Summit in person, and by DSW, German National Association for Student Affairs. And then, what a recognition and success. In the following World Conference, this year, IASIS has been invited as an NGO and represented by Lisa Badil, our Secretary General, and Birgit Schreiber, Vice President of IASIS. A great exception. Usually, only delegations of member states join the conferences. NGOs have to be part of the national delegations. So we can hold for today, student affairs are actually recognized as one key factor for access to higher education and for student success, and necessary part of higher integration and education. But now I want to come to this global summit. We are pleased to welcoming about 90 student affairs leaders in person and about 60 hybrid around the world. This is the largest number, and it was not expectable in the current situation. Since more than 2 years, the world we knew before has rapidly changed. The keywords are climate change, COVID, auto crisis, which are hindering free and independent higher education, acts of war around the world, and more. What does this make with student affairs? I personally have to admit, at first, I wasn't convinced when we started to focus the topics of the global summits on the SDGs of UNESCO beginning 2016 in Stellenbosch. Perhaps this may have been my perspective as a political lobbyist of a national umbrella association, whose main task is to push the interest of the student services and to enhance social conditions of students' life. But I learned from service concerning values and orientations of students, and not least by Friday for Future, that the young generation has become more critical with our previous lifestyle. She calls for more sustainability, for more and their responsibility to shaping the society in the future. These matters also have an impact for the design of student affairs. We as professionals have to reflect the change and to find answers. A stage for this reflection is a global summit. Let's get specific. Student affairs was, especially in the COVID pandemic, strongly demanded. The shutdown led for many students to job loss, financial challenges, isolation, mental disorders, and more. Next to the expansion of counseling services, financial support was asked, as well care for freshmen which couldn't get to know the university from inside, or international students that were not able to go back in the home country because the borders were closed. And I heard by many international students which were threatened to finish their studies because the monthly check was eliminated. So suddenly student affairs were faced with many new challenges, and the staff and leaders in student affairs have mastered it with creativity, imagination, or talent for improvisation. In this time, IASIS tried to support student affairs leaders around the world as well as possible with webinar series, global association meetings, peer-to-peer support, enabling international networks, virtual exchanges, and more to spread regional solutions in the pandemic situation around the world. Furthermore, the effects of the climate change require more sustainability, more careful use of resources of our Earth, which only exists once. This must increasingly be part of a personal development for future elites who entrust themselves to our educational responsibility provided by student services and affairs. And against a world of increasing nation-state thinking, we will have to counter more the model of global citizenship, if not all internationalization efforts of the last decades are to be thwarted. Only in this way, a peaceful world can be realized. These are the challenges for student affairs in the next years, expanded by the socio-academic integration of students which never have entered the campus in the last 2 years, but learned virtually. Not only students' life is to convey to them, also social skills that they were not able to practice during this time. There's a lot of catching up to do, which will challenge student affairs. So I hope that this global summit will help you to develop common solutions for the mentioned challenges in cooperation with partners from all over the world. This global summit allows you to meet new colleagues, new ways of thinking, and approaches from other regions of the world, and possibly to apply them in your home country. So take the chance and have a successful global summit. It's up to you with which new experiences you are going back and how you stay in touch after the global summit. Thank you very much.
I don't know what that seems okay. So yeah, actually that's the door. If you go past that door, it can open automatically, and it's very difficult to go discreetly. But it's all over the building. Thank you, Akeem. I suppose it's my privilege now to welcome our next guest. We are honoured and privileged to welcome our keynote speaker, Professor Michael Murphy, President of the European University Association, a past President of University College Cork, Ireland from 2007 to 2017. He has been active in many academic organizations in Europe and in the United States, and has served as Vice Chancellor of the National University of Ireland. He's been Chair of the Health Research Board of Ireland, Chair of the Irish Universities Association, and Chair of the Permanent Working Group of European Hospital Doctors. Currently, he chairs the Steering Committee of the European Learning and Teaching Forum and the Advisory Board of U Multirank. Professor Murphy graduated in medicine from University College Cork in 1976. Following postgraduate medical training in Dublin and in clinical pharmacology at the Royal Postgraduate Medical School in London, he received his doctorate from the National University of Ireland in 1984. Dr. Murphy spent a decade on the faculties of pharmacology, physiology, and medicine at the University of Chicago before returning to Cork as Professor of Clinical Pharmacology and later as Dean of Medicine. It is indeed my pleasure to welcome Professor Michael Murphy.
Thank you, Paul. I could have given you a shorter biography. President, colleagues, can I start by thanking you for this very kind invitation to walk down the 9-minute walk from my home in Cork. It's a great pleasure to have a reason to be in Cork at the moment, and it's a pleasure to welcome you. Student affairs and services have been something that I personally have valued enormously. I had always had the view that when students look back at their experience of higher education, it is the extracurricular elements that feature most in those memories. And what you do in your roles on your campuses shapes those memories. And some of the natives here will remember that when I became president here in 2007, I had to create a new management team and created a role of vice president for the student experience, which raised some eyebrows at the time. But we had 4 vice presidents: teaching and learning, the academic affairs, the senior one, research and student experience. And I commend that approach to you, if it's not already the case on your campus, because that is a symbolic recognition of the importance of what you do. Now, I got writing instructions for this meeting. I was told you speak for 45 minutes and you might talk about certain things. So I am going to talk about, firstly, the future shape of universities, role and shape as we see them. I'll make a few comments on the implications of change for your role in the universities. And then I'm going to have a little section on the Sustainable Development Goals, because I met Brigitte and Lisa in Barcelona a month ago, and they told me what to talk about. So, and that was included, not knowing that my successor, president, probably told you half the story last night. But anyway, it's never lost in retelling. So, the future universities. About a year ago, EUA published a position paper, which we called Universities Without Walls. It's a vision for the next 10 to 15 years, and it was the culmination of a year-long consultation process with universities across Europe, about 100 experts on higher education from across the world, the European Commission, some governments, the business sector, civic society, and we asked them their views on what is going to happen in the world and what must universities do to support society in dealing with challenges. By the way, for those of you not familiar with the EUA, we are the representative body for universities of the 49 countries of the European higher education area, stretching from Reykjavik to Vladivostok, although I will have to say Vladivostok and Russian universities are currently suspended. And our job is to represent the interests of the university sector as a whole. So we have about 850 member universities and national rectors conferences from 34 countries. Now, what did we find in our consultation process last year? Well, the first thing we discovered was that there is very broad consensus in society about what the challenges are going to be over the next 10 to 15 years. And you can guess them in about 1 minute yourself. Top of the list is environmental sustainability, climate change, which we have to manage while at the same time sustaining economies. That's not easy. Secondly, digitalization, artificial intelligence, and particularly the manner in which this is going to affect the workplace, which in turn creates new demands of universities to prepare young people and older people to compete with AI and at the same time to exploit it. Next on the list were demographic shifts, and of course they're impacting virtually every country in different ways: falling birth rates, migration, aging populations, and so on. And in particular parts of the world, the global south, a rapidly increasing population of university age. Another subject that bothers people a lot is societal polarization, because in many countries this is accompanied by growing inequalities and lack of opportunity. And in other countries, it's driven by social media, misinformation, destabilizing democratic societies. And no country is immune to this. On the list was global geopolitical realignment, the competition that is emerging between USA and China, for example, but other parts for dominant role economically. And of course, this is undermining cooperation at a time when global cooperation was never more important. There are calls for Europe to get its act together, to be strong enough to make a much greater contribution to global capacity, but also to act as a go-between among those other geopolitical areas that are competing. And of course, lastly, the pandemic featured in everybody's thinking as we did this consultation about a year ago. So lots of agreement on the challenges. Surprisingly, we also found a good deal of consensus on what universities must do. Firstly, of course, everybody agrees that universities have a critical role to play in supporting society to combat all of these challenges. But the message was universities too have to evolve, and as quickly as society changes, and in many different ways. So we chose the title, Universities Without Walls, to symbolize the philosophy of the changes that must take place. I'll have to admit here, I'm standing in Cork, the title came to somebody's frontal lobe while looking across from Baltimore to Sherkin Island in West Cork. That's not in the report, but I just shared that with you here. Now, message number one, we have to be much more open, more transformative, more engaged in society, and greatly more transnational. So universities without walls in the first instance means no more ivory towers. Obviously, we're talking about blended campuses now, traditional learning on campus combined with online learning. And that's the only way that universities can deliver effective lifelong learning into the future. Another message, students must learn more outside the campus, in the workplace, experiential learning, but not just in business, but in civic, social, and cultural spaces, depending on the discipline. And this is the model that will sharpen students' real-world problem-solving skills. It should foster creative thinking and imbue students with better work-ready interpersonal skills. There is a good book by Joseph Aoun, who is the president of Northeastern University in Boston. It's called Robot Proof, Higher Education in the Age of Artificial Intelligence. And if you want to explore this concept of the importance of experiential learning, that's a good read if you're on an intercontinental flight. Now, that's referring to students going through the walls. We also see staff moving regularly between campus and the workplace. Bidirectional mobility, because it is very important to ensure that course content is up to date and to ensure that staff's own skills are updated continuously. That will be new for many campuses. Curriculum design must involve societal stakeholders, because that is the only way that it will be fit for purpose and relevant. And all universities' curricular advisory boards must have external members who are listened to, not treated as window dressing, which is a common phenomenon, certainly in European universities. We must be embedded in our regions, working with society, business, civic society. And there's a strong emphasis now, of course, on universities as leaders of regional innovation, whether it be economic or civil. A new concept, and for those not from Europe, this may raise some eyebrows because we are committed to networking of universities, deep networking within countries, across borders, and beyond Europe in the wider world. The idea being that our students and our staff and our researchers should be free to move freely in pursuit of intercultural learning and better experiences, more diverse experiences. And this form of transnational networking should increase transnational solidarity so that all parts of the world succeed. Some of you may be familiar with new European university alliances, which were the brainchild of President Macron of France. These are now doing the pilot work to establish what the challenges are facing networking, and to tell the governments what changes need to be made to facilitate the new model. We do require new forms of academic governance and finance models, of course, for this to work. So the key message from this point is, from all of this, is openness, walls tumbling down, porous institutions. Second key headline then in the vision is that our overarching goal in universities in the coming decade must be to support society to attain the SDGs, the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Primary objective of everything that we do: education, research, innovation, culture. And of course, we have to be role models of sustainable practices in our societies. And I will be coming back to that in the second half. Diversity is a key objective in two facets. Firstly, we must respect the importance of the diversity of universities themselves. It is a strength of the European system, and that diversity must be valued. In other words, it shouldn't matter where you sit on the spectrum of missions. There is no doubt that collectively, regional universities are as important to society as the most famous research-intensive institutions. All universities have important roles to play that are complementary to one another. And the last point, the second point on diversity, of course, is that in every university campus, the community that you meet should reflect the nature of the community in which the university is based. All equal access and opportunity for all. We also make some comments on the individual missions of the universities, starting off with learning and teaching. And we see that, of course, that is going to change dramatically because it will no longer be the preserve of 18 to 24 or 25-year-olds, because learning now takes place over a lifetime. Longer life expectancy, rapid change in the skill sets that are required to succeed in life demands lifelong learning. And to deliver that, we have to dramatically change the nature of the university delivery of teaching and learning and of assessment. And so we have to get accustomed to the concept of students designing their own learning portfolios, moving between different institutions, accumulating learning. We also, in this model, will be treating learners differently from the past, not as sponges of facts, but as partners in co-creation of understanding and application of knowledge. Regurgitation of facts will not be required at examinations, but demonstrating capacity to interpret and apply. Digitalization will enable blended learning, and it will greatly increase opportunities for international and intercultural learning. Now, we agree that it is never going to replace physical mobility. It will complement physical mobility, but it would also provide opportunities for millions of students who could never afford physical mobility to have a degree of intercultural experience. In a sense, it will be a democratizer. It will democratize international mobility, but still a major place for our physical campuses, delivering functions that they have for centuries. And of course, we also anticipate that learning analytics, the application of artificial intelligence frameworks, will allow us to develop bespoke, individualized student learning support. So digitalization has got positives, and of course it has challenges. On research, we make points that research and innovation is also going to evolve with a much bigger focus on ethical behavior, ethical frameworks, and integrity, because we have to grow and sustain trust in science and expertise. Open science will be the dominant form of sharing information into the future, publishing in journals, not behind paywalls, and sharing our data in repositories. Again, openness breeding trust. You come from different parts of the world. There are different philosophies about how to organize university systems. If you're from the United States or from China, or if you're from India, you are supporting the concept of focusing investment in elite institutions to make you competitive. We take the view in Europe that that is a contributor to the inequalities and political dysfunctionalities that are seen. And we talk about distributed excellence. In other words, rather than consolidating in a few places, we will build on our networked institutions that are distributed across Europe, so that no part of Europe is left behind. In 30 years' time, someone will tell us who made the right bet. My bet is on distributed excellence. And last point on research, interdisciplinarity is crucial, because it's at that interface that innovation happens. And we see a lot more blending of the humanities and the STEM disciplines in the future in the interests of innovation. On the third mission, societal engagement, universities as leaders in regions and societies, but it does demand that our staff are much more engaged in public discourse than they have been in recent decades. And we must remember that as participation rates have grown across the world in higher education, there is a very large and growing cadre of graduates and alumni out in society who can be ambassadors for universities. And we need to connect much better with them. And this is a part of a student service agenda, if I might say so, because it is building the relationships you've established when students were with you on campus and exploiting their support to gain investment and influence, greater influence out in society. Because that's a challenge for us all right now, that the university sector does not have the political influence that it merits, and we have work to do to address that gap. I would be shot in the Glucksman Gallery if I didn't make one reference to culture, because of course, universities are the repositories of the cultural assets of countries. We have museums, we have art galleries, we have libraries, drama theatres, performance spaces. So we house artifacts of our individual cultures, and our staff interpret those artifacts. And this will remain an incredibly important duty of universities into the future. So that's the tour of what universities are going to look like in the coming years. For some of you, this will be seen as, well, that's what we're doing today. And if you are saying that, good for you. Unfortunately, in many parts of Europe and in many parts of the world, there is still a substantial gap between what is and what we need to be in the next 10 to 15 years. I won't labor the points on what needs to be done, except to say the following. University autonomy and accountability are not just matters of theory, they are hugely practically important. The determinants of our success lie in our power and lie in the power of others. We have the view that it is critical that universities quickly step up to the plate and do those things that are within our own power. And the first one is, every strategic plan of every university should adhere to the vision and prioritizing the SDGs. Secondly, competent leadership, strong leadership, is extremely important, and professionalization of institutional management is very important. In many countries, it is assumed that leadership is a divine gift from God. No training required. It doesn't work. And we've got to change our practices in many parts of Europe and the world. We've got to recognize the importance of external expertise in guiding what we do. This is still not the case in many universities. And the last thing we've got to do is we have to reform how we reward people in the universities so that they are incentivized to do what needs to be done to deliver the vision. So career assessment reform is extremely important. And I can say a lot about that, but that's another speech, for another occasion. It's underway. The design of it is underway, and we have to embrace it. And of course, beyond us, there are the governments. And without support of government, we're not going to be successful. If the regulatory frameworks don't give us the right balance between accountability and autonomy, we're not going to be successful. And there needs to be consistency in those frameworks between countries if cooperation is to succeed. And we need to be funded sufficiently, because without funding, innovation and growth do not occur. And countries are only going to be as successful as their universities will be. Pause on that one. Countries are only going to be as successful as their universities are going to be in our knowledge economy. There are implications for you in student services. And of course, it's very dangerous for somebody who does not live in a space to actually make any comments to experts on their business. But it does strike me as I go down through Universities Without Walls that there are challenges. The blended campuses, with students spending less time physically on campuses availing of your services. So how are they going to avail of the traditional services? Or how do you adapt those services? How do you reach those students delivering services remotely? What new skills do your staff require? How do you exploit technology? I'm trying to set the programs for your breakout meetings for the next 2 days. Greater diversity among students, lifelong learners, people who are working, learners based in other countries. Where do your responsibilities begin and end? Can you actually serve all these students, and how do you prioritize? But I'm sure this is bread and butter for your discussions. What functions are the responsibilities of the university campus, and which are the responsibility of the state? I went through that one here for 10 years, 9 of which were featured budgetary cutbacks. So anyway, there's no shortage of topics for your conference. But I do suggest that you might take a glance, if you have a moment, at what is not a long document on Universities Without Walls. Right, SDGs. I promised some remarks. I was asked to do so. In my view, they are simply the most important, most significant, and most urgent objectives for all of us. They were agreed at the United Nations in 2015, and that was a remarkable achievement, agreement on such a challenging agenda. I'm Irish. I take some pride in the fact, and I'm sure most people in the room will not know this, but the SDGs were jointly authored by David Donoghue, an honorary doctor of this institution, who was the Irish ambassador to the United Nations, and his co-chair was Machiara Kamau of Kenya. They drafted and negotiated, and they are names that should be better known. So I'm trying to help here this morning. The 17 objectives are relevant to universities, not just number 4, education. Every single one of them interfaces with our missions, and they will not be achieved unless the university sector dynamically addresses them. And a further point, success in universities in addressing SDGs will be determined largely by the quality of leadership within the institution. So, how do we support society? Well, we educate and train most of the professionals who in their careers will implement the SDGs. So every discipline in every university has a role to play, and graduates must leave with knowledge of SDGs and an understanding of the role that each can play in addressing them, and possessing a personal set of values that honor the SDGs. Obviously, our researchers create the new knowledge that is necessary to overcome the challenges, but researchers also gather evidence to support interventions and to evaluate their impact and to inform public policy. Universities are everywhere in this agenda. And thirdly, our engagement with society that I've talked about earlier, business, trade unions, cultural organizations, politicians, gives us an opportunity to influence all other societal stakeholders. So leading by example, implementing the goals effectively on our own campuses, we become role models, influencing the attitudes and the actions of others. Watching my time, I'm going to skip a bit here and go on to some practical suggestions. The first practical suggestion I have relates to leadership, and that means that your president and your rector or your vice chancellor and the management team must take a lead. Some of you may remember Ralph Waldo Emerson. He was an American philosopher of the 19th century, and he made a very simple statement that an institution is but the lengthened shadow of one man. That was before gender equality was considered. But it's a very significant statement of the reality. So I'm setting it out that the John O'Hallorans of this world have to take a major lead for this agenda. It's difficult because all staff these days are burdened. Ever increasing, enlarging agenda, never enough resources, and I suppose growing skepticism and even a degree of cynicism among staff at just one more responsibility. So motivation of the staff of a university is an enormous challenge. I was asked the question, how do you do it, about 10 years ago? And the answer actually just happened. It's the power of the students and the ingenuity of the student leaders. Their leadership is also important because leadership in universities doesn't reside only in the president's office, but it also resides in the student body in particular. In numbers, they dominate our campuses. In enthusiasm and energy, they outmatch any one of us, and they have far more skin in the game, because if we don't get it right, they're going to be paying the price, and they know it. So if you want your university to succeed on this agenda, get the students in control or sharing control at the very beginning. I don't know if John O'Halloran mentioned the story last night about how it happened here. In 2007, I had just started. The student leaders came to the office. They were invited, they were told that they could have one sit-in protest every year in my office, as long as I knew 24 hours in advance that it was going to happen, and I would be on a train. But in any event, they came in and they said, President, we've all come from schools, secondary schools and primary schools, who have been flying the green flag for the last 20 years, recognizing what we do in waste management, recycling, water, energy saving, etc., etc. Where's the green flag here? And I didn't say, what do you mean green flag? I did have children at school. So it was agreed that there should be a green flag on this campus. And they were put in charge, working with buildings and estates, working with the management team. And in 2010, the green flag went up. You've seen it. I'm sure you couldn't possibly have been here for 12 hours and not know. I recommend that approach to every university. The FEE, the Foundation for Environmental Education, is based in Copenhagen. It has been operating for 30 years. It's now active in 59,000 schools across 70 countries, reaching at all times to 20 million students, children. And they all, well, most of them these days, go onto your campuses. So you have programmed champions available to you with whom you must work. Now, quickly going on, there are now 80 universities in 26 countries that have joined the program. If you fly a green flag at the center of your campus on your quad, you're making a statement. And it has a symbolic value for everybody working on the campus and everybody visiting. And it spreads the news. And it's happened here because only a few years later, in 2016, the first hospital in the world to receive a green hospital flag was the university hospital 3 kilometers out the road. The value of osmosis, symbolism and osmosis. So that's the first point, leadership, but particularly student leadership. Second ingredient, planning for change. So now there should be no university in the world that doesn't have in its strategic plan a section on SDGs, or better still, a strategic plan for implementation of SDGs themselves. That is fundamentally needed. And then we have to SDG proof everything that we do, involving our staff, our students, and our stakeholders. And it must be managed. There has to be an operational plan with targets every year. And there has to be monitoring of achievement every year and adjustment. But you don't measure, you cannot manage. And that's a second fundamental. There is a good document from the Australians. It's called Getting Started with the SDGs in Universities. It was developed jointly by the Australasian campuses towards sustainability. It's on the web. I recommend it as a starting point. Third challenge, implementation. What other tricks can you bring into play? I'll give you one. And you probably got some of it from John last night. Academics in particular, and students, are competitive. And they're always subject to peer review. So you have to create a circumstance where they are being peer reviewed continuously. And you do that by going into the ranking systems. Now, I have to give a speech next week on rankings in Warsaw, and I'm not going to give that script here. Rankings have limitations and they have value. But there are two out there relevant to this agenda. The green metrics from the University of Indonesia. And the second is now the Times Higher Education impact rankings. It's quite amazing what a behavior change can be induced by getting your university to join rankings. I recommend that as a trick to get buy-in and enthusiasm. So that's my personal experience. Leadership, plan, monitor, and peer pressure. And if you do that, the world will be a much healthier place in 10 to 15 years. So, allowing time for some questions or discussion, my main purpose was to convey that the world is changing, universities are changing, your services have a major role in universities and must change. But whatever we do, at the end of the day, our key objective is delivery of the SDGs. Thank you very much. I'm happy to take questions. Criticism or challenges. Was that part of the agenda? Association. Because I can say to you that I can move. Is that the point? I can move.
The people online need to be able to hear any questions.
Because student services are not a sufficiently high-ranking agenda item in any body that any institution or organization that I have been in over the last 20 years. And I'm delighted to see that you have got organized and that you're becoming noisy. But our organizations do need to actually sit down, because I think we, hands in the air, mea culpa, we do need to have some formal policies and guidelines at our level in Europe and in other parts of the world to recognize and sustain your agenda. Right. We have a question. And it's a roving mic.
Thank you very much. It was a lovely speech. Thanks very much, and very inspiring. And I wish more people would learn your speech off by heart when they go to sleep at night, and take it to heart what you say. I loved your comment now about student services in the European space, and because in a sense the student services are in the public domain and in public welfare domain, and so to speak, they're not directly in the line of universities. And so it's hard for universities in the European space to really weigh in on student services, because often they're in the public space. So they kind of straddle that space. And so I wondered whether you have advice for us in the European space to put more pressure on student services.
It has been my sense that student services have a more prominent role in the Anglophone world. Any tomatoes coming my way? I am not as conscious going around European campuses, European continental campuses, of student services having the status, having the scope that they do in Anglophone campuses. And having formed the view that the extracurricular experience is as important and possibly more important an influence on the attitude of students towards their experience, I have always said that European continental systems should pay more attention to the agenda. Now, the president here is from Germany, and he will probably say, "You don't know what you're talking about," or he might say, he might agree with me. And I think that a lot of countries don't appreciate the manner in which they could enhance the student experience in their campuses. That they would do if they had a more holistic approach to the nature of what campuses should deliver, or universities should deliver to their students. And that perhaps that's why we need to sit down and have some conversations between EUA and the association to form some guidelines. But evidence base is critical. The evidence base that what we believe here, or what it may be believed on a North American campus, actually does ultimately have an impact that we think it has. You are perfectly happy to
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Murphy, for your great speech. And I learned much about student affairs, a perspective from the European University Association, and maybe your perspective. At first, I would like to thank you that you set the focus as well on the challenges which came with the pandemic and after the pandemic, because I think we don't see that maybe the campuses won't be the same as before the pandemic situation. This is one point. And the other point you talked about, and this was a question by Birgit Schreiber, I don't see this conflict as well as you don't, because in the continental program or the continental universities in Europe, for example, there is as well a discussion between universities and student affairs, how to cooperate better in the future. Yes, I see it as you. It will be necessary. And I can give you one example. When we had a discussion in our association starting in 2012, and we invited as well representatives of the universities because we wanted to develop a strategic plan for 2020. And of course, we saw the necessity that universities and student affairs in Germany, Studentenwerke, but it's the same in France, it's the same in Italy. They have to cooperate better with universities. On the other hand, universities have to see the importance of student services, and they have to develop as well common programs. So I see it's a chance for the future as well. Thank you.
And it's also the case that the agenda for transnational alliances will bring into sharp focus for the students who are mobile and staff who are mobile, that there are differences between experiences in different countries. And of course, this will grow pressure for change in those countries that undervalue the services agenda. There's a hand. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you for your talk and your experience, and quite honestly, your leadership around these areas. It's appreciated. You said three things right in a row that caught my attention, which is probably more about my attention span than your speaking prowess. But the first really was addressed by Dr. Schreiber, but there are two other key items that I thought there about the use of external experience to guide leadership in universities. And the other piece was, and you referenced a whole nother talk, but around career assessment reform. There's a lot going on right now in the space of professionalization around student affairs and services globally. So I'm curious about your comments on one or both of those items, if you would.
Forget the first one. On career assessment. Sorry. Just for the other participants. I suppose most of the talk again at the moment is on career assessment in the academic sphere. All that has mattered for the last century is how many papers you have published and in what prestigious journals. And we have learned that that is a very narrow picture of what the academic role is. And the move that is taking place right now is to broaden significantly the spectrum of roles that academics play in the assessment process. So, number one, restoring parity of esteem for teaching with research. That's a really critical one. Giving value to the manner in which staff support students broadly, mentoring, and in a sense, I suppose, contributing to the student services broadly defined. This agenda is being grabbed by the neck. Right now, EUA is sitting down has been for the last 4 months in Brussels with Science Europe, which are of course all the national funding agencies brought together, and the European Commission. And we are currently forming a coalition of the willing, and already some 300 institutions have signed up to reform radically the career assessment process. And in a sense, tangentially, that should benefit the student services agenda, because academics who work with you and who are champions for you will be valued more for that work. If we don't do this, if we don't reform how we value contributions, then there is no incentive for staff and universities to embrace the SDGs, for example, and work to support them. Your first question, you'd better shout again.
Use of external leadership.
Ah, yes. You may be surprised, coming from North America, I guess, that many universities in Europe, many countries, have little or no external expertise on their governing boards. Within the campuses, they lack external experts guiding curriculum and so on. And in North America, you will find this to be absurd. And I guess, again, in parts of the Anglophone world, it will be absurd, but it is a reality that universities remain ivory towers still in many parts of the world. And rediscover wheels. And the main reason for having external expertise on your boards is to stop rediscovering wheels within our institutions, as well, of course, as having guidance on what is now relevant for university missions. And so that is why we have to make the point forcibly that you are not going to be, your institution is not going to be successful in meeting the challenges of the future if it remains isolated from the external world. Another piece of advice to you, if you have power in your universities on these matters, my personal belief is that every university should have at least one or more experienced university leaders from other countries sitting on the board of your university. That again is a way of bridge building, but more importantly, it brings international learning and international experience into your institution. And again, it helps you avoid rediscovering wheels. I've personally, when I started here in 2007, I insisted that the minister should appoint the former rector of the University of Leiden onto the board here. I'm happy to say that he served for 7 years and was most wonderful in intervening to end domestic spats and disagreements among the other members. I recommend it strongly.
2 more questions, please.
Hello. Hello, I'm Gary Rhodes from California, again, responsible for bringing this on to your fair city. The question I have is, our universities have traditionally been giving students degrees, bachelor's, master's, doctorate, certification in professional areas, medicine, law, etc. What do you think of the role of non-traditional certification like digital badging for the purpose of identifying ways that faculty, staff, and students can make an impact on things like the UN SDGs?
I'm all for it, and this institution does it. It again plays to the agenda of experiential learning and recognizing the value of non-traditional learning. And it also will contribute to the system for transferability of learning, and ultimately the creation of lifelong learning portfolios for individuals. It's a platform for that long-term agenda.
And is there anything that your association is doing in that area?
Yes, yes. I'm sure we have policy documents on. We write policy documents about every 36 hours. I dive into them for each meeting, depending on the topic. That didn't specifically apply in my reading. Micro-credentials, how we certify them, how we quality assure them, how we accumulate them. That's the agenda for the next 10 to 15 years.
Hiya. Brian Gormley from TU Dublin. And I was delighted to hear that you're kind of reviewing how promotions among academics are being given. And for a while, I worked with the National Forum for Teaching and Learning in Ireland, and we had a Teaching Heroes Awards, and the nominations were from the students, and you could see what came through was that students really valued teachers and lecturers who were involved in pastoral care and who were supportive and who reached out to them, particularly during the pandemic. But anecdotally, what we heard from lecturers was that female academics in particular were kind of nudged towards pastoral care roles. And I'm generalizing, but male academics focus more on research. And as a result, that female academics felt that their work wasn't valued because it wasn't included in the progression. It wasn't considered for progression. So I'd just be interested to hear your views on that, and maybe can something be done to rectify that, to recognize the role of pastoral care?
First of all, I'd say that those female academics should consult a lawyer. Sorry, I shouldn't be flippant. Well, you're of course identifying another challenge there, and that is that research is rewarded and teaching is awarded, which is a good phrase I picked up recently. The gender piece should not apply. That in this day and age, differentiating based on gender is totally unacceptable. I'm flummoxed now on the main question you asked.
How can the review, the academic progression process be reviewed to kind of eliminate that? And the discrimination does happen, and maybe some, but it does happen.
Number one, you have to have your policies. Number two, they have to be monitored. Number three, they have to be externally verified. So your quality assurance processes, where external peers are brought in every so often, should be looking at that and making the necessary admonitions and recommendations to your university. But beyond all that, every institution has to develop, if it hasn't already done so, a matrix, a framework, setting out all of the functions that are valued within that institution and making sure that they're aligned with good practice nationally and internationally, and formal values placed on different elements of the set of academic functions. After that, if you're telling me that things are not working well, I would have to say the quality assurance, external quality assurance process should be picking that up and making it public. That's the whole purpose of external quality assurance. Don't know if it helps. Right? That's it.
Very much.
I'm surprised.
Thank you very, very much, Michael, and we're delighted that you were able to attend today, and obviously it has raised the bar for Lisa and Birgit, who are coming after us after the coffee. But I suppose I just want to acknowledge that our colleagues online, and there are two comments just to say thank you as well for an inspiring talk. Thank you. So our time is pretty precious actually today, and there's a tight enough schedule, so it's coffee now and back in 15 minutes, and you've got to take into account the journey down to the bottom and particularly the journey back up to the top. So we'll see you all in 1:45. Thank you very much.